This show is proudly brought to you by the #Me Network.
Kia ora, and thanks so much for tuning in to episode 40. Wow, we're middle-aged. Of Access Granted, our weekly tech and media podcast. I'm Raj, my background's film, design, media and technology.
And my name is Mike, and my background is information wrangling, connecting people and getting things done. Now you're here because you're a Kiwi that either works in or has a great passion for tech or media in New Zealand. Episode 40, middle-aged. Later we catch up with TimKong from N4L. We're changing things up again, and this time we're going to have a weekly catch-up with everybody about how we make this podcast sustainable. Whether that's through sponsorship, whether we use some online tools. We're going to take you all through the journey of how we get paid, how we make it sustainable, whatever we need to do so that we can keep bringing these tech stories to you. So at the moment, we've just had a beer in, where are we? Fork and Brewer. We're rushing through this because it's nearly 2 o'clock on that Tuesday.
Where the big final, semi-final is.
The cricket is. So next week we'll have some updates on some of the actions that we've taken to make this a sustainable podcast. We're also going to cut down our intros so that we can rush through to the gold that we all know you love, which is the interviews.
Yep, get down to business. All right, so this week, talking to TimKong from N4L.
What does N4L mean?
N4L was...
Network for Learning.
Yes. So his angle is the tech education sector. Or is it education tech sector?
That's right. One of those things. Tim has a flowery background, and he's done an awful lot of different things, and we had a fascinating conversation with him at the N4L offices, ranging everything from being a roadie for
Chemical
Brothers all the way through to being being a teacher at the Zealand School, and now working for N4L, not bringing tech, but also bringing network and the services that having a good network connection to the internet and what that can mean for schools around New Zealand. Fascinating conversation. I hope you all enjoy it. So here we are. We're in Network for Learning's offices.
It's quite nice.
High in the skyrise of Wellington.
Overlooking Lambton Quay and all the people that look like ants.
Yeah, this is probably the highest we've ever been. And I mean in feet and inches. And we're here to talk with TimKong, who has recently joined Network for Learning. So Tim, the first question we ask everybody.
What makes you happy, Tim?
What makes me happy? I think being part of conversations makes me happy the most. I think if I go back to where I was... Yes,
Thank God for that.
So this makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally works for radio then.
Yeah. No, I go back to an organisation I worked with probably about 15 years ago, and that was their whole... the ethos, really. That process and conversation are what are most interesting about creating. They were a design, art, film, music firm, organisation, probably couldn't call it firm, but they always said it's the conversation that's interesting. Actually, the outputs, they might be interesting, but it's how you get to the output that's the most challenging bit. So conversations about EdTech, what I do, about what's happening in schools in terms of education. Often I look at, you follow Twitter and you think, wow, these are really, some of the things that blow up on Twitter, these are such isolated conversations and it's just one side. And then, seeing some of the other side and how that means.
You're quite this is fair to say, quite the devil's advocate on Twitter?
I can be, yes. Yes, I've been actually stuck into there's a Twitter hashtag called EdChatNZ, run by Danielle Myberg, who this year just approached me and said, I would like to try and gun up these conversations and have not me every year, every week. I said, it'd be good if I'm not there every fortnight. Just to be able, someone that just
ramp it up a little bit,
provoke and just say, "Are you sure?" Because I think particularly Twitter as a medium is so it's the retweet model. It's just amplification of the same point.
Echo chamber.
Yeah. And that can be small or big. So occasionally just going, yeah, but
have you thought about this? Very cool.
So that's what makes me happy.
Very cool. Nice. Phew. I hate conversations. We'll go away now. You mentioned tech ed, and we said you're working...
EdTech.
EdTech. God, I'm going to say that a million times. It's like free
Just
advertising
say
from
education.
Yes, we
Education technology.
There you go.
How's that?
That's the
And you're working now for Network for Learning.
Mhm.
Could you explain, A, what Network for Learning is, and then what the wider education technology? What is that? What does that mean?
Cool. So Network for Learning is a government crown entity that has been established, was established by this government about 18 months ago. Pretty young, very young, and is designed to be built on top of the UFB rollout.
Yes.
And it basically is responsible, in a nutshell, for providing every school in New Zealand with a managed network access. And that
I shake my head. What does that mean?
So exactly. So that's part of why I'm here, is to explain that in real terms. In real terms, because in tech terms, it's a router and it's 100 meg, 500 meg, 30 meg, 10 meg, all those connection-y things. In real terms, what we're trying to do for schools is provide network access, uncapped data for schools, a range of products and services on that network that take away or free up teachers and principals from managing their own network infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the resources that we're developing are around filtering, around internet safety, around authentication, and all of it at a real base level is a utility, just like the internet, just like electricity, just like water. And so what we're trying to do is to say, but the difference between those two, not denigrating electricity or water, but the different layers of how our network infrastructure has been built up in terms of politics, in terms of the different companies, the different connections. That's what we're trying to negotiate over, and to ensure that is reduced for schools, that is delivering really solid connections for schools, and so ultimately that environment, that digital, that online environment, is like I suppose the keeping with that utility analogy, just like electricity, just like water. It's
you just
always
go
there.
get it.
Yep.
And it's easy to, it's literally, I can plug something in. I don't need someone to come and tell me how to plug my toaster in.
For sure.
It just works.
Yep. And so, for example, at Seatoon, where I was have been for the last 7 years, because we got UFB, there was a period where we were able to we signed up with another internet provider before we went for infraRel. So we were used to that and that speed. The biggest thing over that UFB and then the infraRel connection is that teachers just say it just works. I don't have to worry that this stuff won't work when I click this connection or open that page. In a really measurable way is a really small thing, but in an actual meaningful way is a huge thing when you are that teacher in front of 25 to 30 kids who are all excited because you've got all the laptops out, or as increasingly more and more devices are just there.
Yeah.
When that thing doesn't work, it's really obvious, and it slows down a whole bunch of stuff. And that doesn't mean and I'm quite a strong believer in that. That doesn't mean that learning doesn't happen without the internet. And just like it continues without electricity, and good learning has happened, and good teachers will adapt to those things that push back. But increasingly, the reality is that content, examples, experiences, connections are available and made more. I don't really like using the word engaging because I think it's misused, but are made more experiential and more relevant and more real for young people with that connection. And so being able to, what infraRel does is to ensure that connection is always up, always running, to allow that to happen.
It's a platform as a service just for the school network, right? You're creating your own network.
So it's not, and I can go back and check the details on this, but it's not. We're not rolling out new fibre on top of UFB. It's using the existing infrastructure. It's negotiating with existing fibre provision. Spark are the contract to do the contract. So Spark are doing all that back
digging up the roads and
ensuring all those connections from exchange boxes to the ONTs in the room in every school's connected.
Oh, I see. So they go the last mile and into the classroom.
So it's all the way into basically the connection's all the way into the school, and then there's an infraRel router, a managed router that goes into every school.
I'm going to stop you just one sec. You said infraRel?
N4L. N4L.
N4L.
And the branding is with the number 4.
There we go.
I knew that because I typed in the URL and going, wait a minute, there's a number in there.
So that's
Thank you.
Sorry, apologies. That's the branding,
all right.
The branding piece.
N4L.
And so there's a managed router that goes in. That router is obviously managed so that schools, if they can, want to change filtering services or have some issues, that they can remote in and check those settings and work with Spark to make sure all those bits are functioning.
Cool. And then you said you were at Seatoun for
Seatoun School.
7 years.
Oh, yeah, so Seatoun, so my
Sitting on the
backstory,
beach.
Seatoun, yeah, just next to the
Lovely
beach.
fish and chips.
Yeah. Seatoun School for 7 years, which was really
Teacher?
rewarding. Teaching, yeah.
Ah.
And then, so year 5 and 6, and also year 7 and 8 at various times. 3 years before that, so I've been in the classroom for 10 years, was at Avalon Intermediate, up in the hut, Lower Hut. Before that, are we going right back?
No, let's go. Let's
Go right the way back. Before that, I spent
Screaming into
about
the world.
I had it was my year of training up at Teachers College and 5 years in the UK. Before that, from 1998 to 2000, 2003, and when I was there, I did arrange things. Worked for a year with this design company, design collective called Tomato. Do you
I
know?
don't know why that's a good name, but it is.
It's actually not about the fruit/vegetable. It's about the syllables. Tomato. I don't know. It was all done before I was there.
Designers.
Yeah, designers.
Hey.
So I got into them via either side of that year. I worked as a video engineer, production engineer, which is the fancy way of saying I was a rock and roll roadie. And so I worked with bands like the Chemical Brothers and Underworld and brief time with Nine Inch Nails and a range of other one-off acts. And so Underworld, who I worked with in '99, late 2000, early 2000, were a member of that design collective. So they were coming off the road, and they said, "Do you want to come up to London and do some stuff with us?" It was really amazing. The first time they ever called me up, they said, "Oh, why don't you come up? And we've just got this Avid system installed and there's some training. Do you want to come up and learn how to use an Avid?" And I was like, because that was, in the late 90s,
starting,
was big money, so that was neat. And then before that, going right back, Varsity University, Canterbury.
And what did you do? Did you do education or technology or design?
No, my university degree was a Bachelor of Arts in, I like to think, what I enjoyed doing, which at that time my major was political science. But I came out as 7th form and just went, I just want to get to uni and just enjoy conversation and learning. I did a real shotgun of psychology, fem studies, history, Chinese history, and then I really enjoyed university because it was just, there was plenty of times I was stressed and stuff, but I just enjoyed being in a space where you could pick up books and read and think about things. Political science was a major, and I really enjoyed that. I got to the end of that 3-4 years and went, and you do your masters. When I said, I've been here for 4 years, I want to go off and do something. So how I got into technology was while I'd been studying, I was working at the Christchurch Town Hall. Starting off cleaning toilets at 4 a.m, just, because it was student job search and you could get some cash. And I worked, I don't know if it was up, but sideways, but worked with the guys doing technical setups for all the conferences.
I don't know if it was up, I think it was
definitely sideways. But, it was slide projectors and it was sound systems and it was, a bit of lighting, bit of video. I guess the best thing I learned there was that, about people and about service. When you've got a doctor with dozens of letters after their name at a conference who doesn't know which way to point the laser pointer, you can't just laugh at them. You have to explain that little piece of technology in a clear and balanced way, because not just because they're the client, but because it doesn't do you any good to just snark at them.
Yeah,
even though their day job is to put lasers into people's heads. But that whole experience all the way through, and then that idea of service and just, which I think is a very Kiwi thing. For me anyway, it has been that you're willing to give it a go. And I think particularly because the industry is so small, you kind of had to do lots of things. You had to do a bit of sound, lighting, video, and so then when I got to the UK, I was able to, that's a much bigger market, a lot more people. You're able to specialise really quickly, and so just focusing on video production and video projection was my thing.
That was your thing, and then you came out and you went through and then tech, and then so there's a jump here, I imagine, from that to suddenly I'm a Seatoun teacher.
To becoming a teacher, yeah. No, I think when you came back in 2003, got married in 2003 and came back, I've been touring for about 5 years, and then obviously doing corporate sort of production-y stuff before. So I think in terms of the tech stuff, it was just part of what I was doing. It was never, I'm going to go away and get this certificate or degree. And at that time, it was less about software. It was more about hardware and setting up things and plugging in things. But I came off the road, I think, a couple of reasons. One, got married, and for me, it's different for others, but for me, the touring life was very much a single life, in the sense that you were on the road a lot. The year I was engaged, I think I was on the road for 7 months of that year, and and I've got mates who have are married with kids who've stayed touring. I've also got other mates who didn't, and I just made a decision. Look, I've really enjoyed my time, but I'm leaving it on my terms and in a good note. And in the back of my head, I didn't want to be, and this was in 2002, but I'd met guys touring who would tell you stories about touring with Zeppelin in the 70s, and I thought, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be talking. Well, though here I am talking about touring.
Well, a few small stories, but I'm still doing this.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because Foo Fighters have just come through, and Chris Shiflett is the guitarist. It was interesting. I don't know him at all, and he probably wouldn't remember me, but when we were touring, we'd often cross on festivals, and he was just he's just a real friendly guy, and he used to just say, "Oh, hi Tim," because he just knew our crew, and that's what I miss, I think, about that, because it's just such an environment of people who are doing good stuff because they love it, have found niches where they can do really good work. I often used to think that the guys you used to tour with were literally unemployable outside of the bands that they were working with. Because, it's about that relationship between the artist, and they trust the people that they're going on stage with. They have to trust them because they're the ones building
I was just about to say, isn't that similar to where you are now? But apart from that, unemployable outside of the industry.
Yeah.
Maybe not that.
Yeah, and you want
it's a small, educational ed tech.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, I don't know, 10 hand on how many people are actually doing the sort of stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, I think in terms of what we're, as an organisation's doing, it's probably, it's quite a small organisation. I think there's a lot of people interested in it. There's and I'm blanking on his last name, David. There's a meetup that happens here in Wellington, and there's an increasing number of people who are interested in creating ed tech around, I think, that idea of, and I struggle a little bit with that. We can fix it with software, or we can fix it with hardware, and that's often the lead point for ed tech.
It's the tech, not the ed.
Yeah, and you can tell me. My thing is, what's the problem?
Yeah,
What's the problem you're trying to figure? And I was thinking of Anna's one that I was listening to. Well, the problem that Pledge Me has filled is how do small business, small entities raise funds in new ways that are reaching, and that's what the network does in terms of breaking down access to resources in a lot of ways. I think the thing I constantly struggle with when you look at them and they pop up on BuzzFeed or whatever is, well, what is the problem you're really fixing?
Yeah,
because it's easy to build an app or a device or a service that says, and I kind of, not get into trouble, but I think a couple of years back at Webstock, one of the Startup Alley ones was an EdTech one, and things like, so I went, I was really interested, and I went to it, and basically it was just virtual flashcards. I was like, but it's flash! And so you, and I think there's another example, because it's not always just about content or knowledge, it's about, how do we use software to manage behaviour? That's that big idea of the gamification of the process. And so there's a number of apps where you can track students' behaviour and give them stars, and it's an online app, and then it links into their phone, and you see the promotional stuff, and you just like, and as a teacher I'm like, but that conversation, that relationship, you're real, they're real, as you're walking up and down or around the room, why not, instead of tapping your iPad, why don't you just sit with them and say, I really like that writing. I like the effort you've put in there. Yeah. And yes, that's not then transferable to an e-portfolio or to some online management system.
Or metric.
For a large number of our children and our young people, adults actually meeting them where they are and paying attention to where they are, what they're doing, that's the bit that matters. And if you have kids, you know that. I always sometimes think, yeah, but if you were a parent, would you use the software in your kids? Would it be worth the effort instead of just going, I'm going to sit with you and show you how to tie your shoes? Or whatever it is.
Sometimes it could take less time just to do that.
Yeah.
And train up on all this wizardry that you might not use anyway.
Finally got a YouTube video, go, you've learned it?
Yeah, exactly.
Your brother.
Yeah. And I think the other one is sometimes we, in Google Classroom, when it came out, I held my head when the promo video, and I know, and I guess I'm always that devil's advocate stuff, you've always got to not just react to the promo material, because that's a different message or a different process than the actual way it might be used. But Google Classroom, when they came out, I think they had an actual teacher saying, well, before Google Classroom, I had a kitchen table covered with books, and I had to carry my books, and now I've got Google Classroom, it's just all on my laptop. And then they continued. And I said, but what about the marking and the feedback? Because regardless of whether it's in paper and books or attached to your Google Doc, the effort and the time and the process that matters most to the child and your students is all the time it takes to do all the writing and give feedback. And that's irrespective of, and it, yes, it may be easier because you're looking at it in 25 tabs as opposed to 25 books. But that's the bit that matters that Google Classroom can't help you with, is are you giving useful feedback to that child, to those students? Yeah. So, and I think we celebrate the things that are easy to see and often easier to measure. And the challenge then is in behind those things, which are fine, and you can go, yep, that's cool. The challenge is, how do you continue that conversation after? How did that? Well, actually, it took me 3 hours to give useful feedback, and I'm supposed to do this twice a week. Whoa, okay, that's a conversation about our expectation, about feedback, about how maybe the tasks we're asking students to do, and the workload on teachers. So.
Are you finding from EdTech, and as you say, all the apps, I mean, it's become a massive, it has been pretty big, but it's now become a massive industry of apps galore that will either help the teachers, help the students, sit in between, do the admin. Are they generally replacing, or they seem to be replacing what a teacher does, as opposed to sit underneath a teacher and help them do what they do better? Is that...
Some of them do that, the admin stuff.
I'm not quite sure I'm getting that right, but they seem to be, that one there about Google Classroom, it seems to be saying, I can replace you with all this stuff, and it's like, well, you don't actually. You shouldn't be replacing you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one in terms of what Network for Learning is doing, and if you think of what a managed network is and what could be delivered over that managed network to reduce like I said earlier, teacher stress. The internet works, and it's great, so that I can get on with using it. To those apps. But there's also some things in terms of administration around single sign-on, for example, as a method for what a teacher might be logging onto in terms of all the services that they're already currently using. If I'm logging in with my Google account, can that then replicate and open up a whole bunch of other things? And all it is as a utility, it's a minor layer on top of things, but in terms of the value that it adds to the process of using the internet, it's huge. And that's why that sign in with Facebook or sign in with Google just opens up. It's easy, so it works, and because it's easy, I then use it. That to speak to your point about does it augment, and so that's what I think N4L can build, and to support schools as organisations. To go to your point about, well, are the apps that are being developed for teachers just replicating what they're already doing in an analog world? There's a lot of those, the flashcards type model, or you look at a site and it goes, well, this is there's an interesting one. It was an iPad app, and it was handwriting or letter shaping, but with the kid drawing their finger on it, and I was like, well, you could do that with a pen and paper. And that's not to say that you can't do other things with the iPad, but if that's what you're leading with as the thing that justifies the iPad, then it gets a bit shaky, I think.
Is that almost using tech for tech's sake rather than from actually using it?
Truly, like that's doing something that's like, we could never have done that before. That's brilliant. Are there lots of those, or are there none of those, or there's two?
Well, I think the difference between education as a sector and say how other sectors have been zero or say online banking. I think last year I got in a conversation with someone. I said, yeah, but banking's still banking, isn't it? The actual key thing that you're doing, which is transferring funds from one account to the other or paying a bill, is literally, it's the same underlying process. But what we've done is change the interface to that process. The challenge with education is that interface is actually, like I've alluded to, actually about relationship and people. And so it's easy to build an app that maybe replicates what that is. But it can't ever really, because relationships are about people and conversation and humans. To go to your point about the amount of money that's going, it's huge. You know, I think the interesting thing about education is it's a captive market. You know, it's like, well, they're there for 12 years.
That's
We got them.
And you got to go.
And if we get them early, whoa, they're going to sign up and we're going to be in. You know, and I've said this to startups. I said, well, the challenge with the New Zealand education sector is that because of tomorrow's schools, and every school is essentially a self-managing business entity, to sell your product, your app or your service, you literally have to go to 2,500 schools and say, would you like to use my app? So from a business point of view, that doesn't scale. You're better off selling into some of these more centralized education systems, which, you know, so the States or the UK or, you know, Malaysia, you know, I mean, I know it's fallen over now, but Malaysia, you know, they signed up for Google and it was all Chromebooks. And
They went boots and all, didn't they?
yeah. It's like, well, if you could have been in on that, then that's a lot of devices. I think that, you know, and I think the other thing is education, just like banking, you know, we look at the zeros and the online banking and the big success stories of, you know, this internet and web-based world, and you go, well, we've got to be like that. Because if we're not, and the 21st century learning, modern learning environments, all the different buzzers are about being future focused. And what's the easiest way to appear future focused? Lots of devices.
Get a shiny, shiny.
Get some shiny things in.
Raj.
That's right.
And then
Shiny thing.
yeah. And then that bit that you go, well, actually, and so you deploy all that, and retailers, and that's great because once they don't care,
The kids like playing on it, to be fair.
Yeah.
But they're waiting till they get free time to put a game on, really.
Yeah. But I think the other thing, I guess it goes to that bit of being a devil's advocate. I'm not saying that these tools can't make a difference, but I don't think we have enough in education, enough really robust discussion to say it's like the Emperor's New Clothes.
Yes.
It's a flashcard.
Yeah.
Okay. Because what will happen is you get the iPad and you use flashcards, and then your actual flashcards just sit gathering dust.
Yeah.
So, well, you could, or then when they get pulled out because you don't have enough iPads, no one hails the paper flashcards as the thing that's making a difference to learning. So there's that constant tension, I think, between the pressure, and it's a little bit, a little bit media driven, a little bit culture driven, and that's why I get a bit, there's articles, parents ask so much, they need whiteboard pens and you need all this, and you, as a teacher who's in it, you go, well, that's not a reflection on either of those tools or the system or the parents. It's a reflection on that as schools we haven't had useful enough conversations about why we want these tools and how they're going to be used. So you either get the horror stories about, my child was able to access porn, or this is just cost too much money, or if you've got to that point in the media, and often it's based on a handful of parents who probably haven't read the emailed out newsletter or gone to the meeting, and so it doesn't reflect how those systems are. And hopefully that in good schools that are rolling out devices one-to-one, there is an ongoing conversation with parents. But that's hard because that requires, it's as a school principal and teacher, you've got so many conversations going at the same time, whether it's with ministry, whether it's teachers, development. And so, like I say, all of this, it's really easy to say this device, this package, this program. What's harder is to say, well, after that person's come in and done the PR pitch, what happens the next day?
Yeah.
The thing I've always said, in 10 years of teaching, I was never asked to do anything less or to not use something. So all the things you came out of Teachers College with, the methods, the paper, the planning, was never said, well, don't use that anymore. We just got said, well, you can now use this. Now
as well as.
Yeah. Now you don't have the role, you've got this electronic role, and then it's a student database here, and then actually you've got a spreadsheet here, and then you've got a paper printed list where you tick things. And so in terms of, those aren't reflections of those tools, they're reflections of systems that aren't saying, well, how do we make one system, it's not one ring that fits all, but how do you make it that it is the most, and it can't just be, it's never a one-size-fits-all, because you have teachers all across that spectrum who are starting new, who have been in the business for 30 years. That's shifting human behaviour, which is a huge ask.
If you go in New Zealand, then we've got that each school is it has its own board, its own limited company. things are changing across everywhere and things are getting piled on top of instead of, someone standing back and saying, well, look, we've got all this stuff. It's like getting rid of the laws from, 1600s in Britain. Finally someone said, should we have a look at the rule book? What, really? Goats and horses across that? I don't think we need that law anymore in taxis, do we?
Yeah, it's all the artifacts.
That's right. Let's just get rid of them.
Of how we function.
It's something like someone needs to sit back and go, right, all that stuff that we used to do in the 50s, let's have a look at it. We don't need it necessarily. However, if you're all separate, and I say you, that's unfair, you and then that conversation must be really hard to have.
Well, you have had 2,500 times, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah.
Same conversation.
It's almost going back to, and I presume this is what the ministry's job is. Is that fair? I'm asking you to describe something completely separate to what you are, but...
Yeah, I think the ministry provides, this is just personal, but in terms of the ministry is about providing structures for those things to happen. And arguably, the challenge the ministry has is how do they communicate that? I think there's been a disconnect between, and often you talk to startups and they, could we go to the Ministry of Education? Well, no, because the model's designed that every school can negotiate. Yeah. So, and I had a conversation last year. Someone was going, well, why aren't they teaching this? And I said, well, one of the key differences is that you need to understand that New Zealand curriculum, which is overarching, and the national standards are just that they're a national curriculum. Every school is then tasked with building its own curriculum to meet the needs of its students, to meet the needs of its environment, and so you get a disconnect. And the other thing is the ministry, as a government ministry, has to go with the edicts of the government of the day in terms of developing policy that matches that. And the challenge then is schools which exist, some of our schools are 100. Long time, are being hit with these initiatives as they come down the line. And as organisations they exist, but then as principals within those places, which would chop and change. If you've got a principal with 20 years experience versus a principal with 5 years experience, and I know, I think there was an article in the Herald about young principals leaving, society asks a hell of a lot of a principal to be, who may only been in teaching for 3-4 years. You're expecting to be property manager, you're expecting to be legally braced, you're expecting them to understand human resources, you're expecting them to understand all this pedagogy and how to teach and how to make sense of children. And then, at the same time, they've got to be that person who is there, talking with that kid about why it's not okay to smack the other kid in the head.
Yes.
And if you think of that as a parent, I've got 2 little girls, that's enough of an effort just to manage, how do you scale that across, some of it, who might be, 27, 28, I don't know. When you think of the life experience that sort of person has, they're big asks, and society asks a lot. And I think, you say those conversations have to happen with every school, but they don't. It's really, it's really easy to say this app, this program. That really nuanced, ongoing conversation about, and those things you can't start. Okay, we're starting here at day A. Day 1, and by day 10 we'll be here, because every single one of those schools are at different places. Yeah. I think the other thing in terms of that artifacting thing about all the stuff that we have to get rid of, I find in my experience it's actually really hard for people to get rid of the things that have got them to that point.
Oh yes.
Because those are the things that give them value.
Yes.
And I've struggled. You stand there and say, well, we've got this new app. And you're saying it to a teacher who's got 25 years experience in actually teaching really well and creating really good experiences, and you're saying, get rid of all of those things that give you value, personally as well as professionally, and use this thing. And so we're asking you to enter a whole new bit of, a whole new layers of stress and learning curve. And I'm not saying that, teachers know everything, and there is, teachers need to be willing to be stressed like students are, because that's about learning. But, a lot of these apps, to go to what you said, it's the same outcome.
I'll tell you a story.
So why am I learning all this new stuff? And I think the interesting thing about education is that the cycle is so constant and so regularly irregular, in the sense that we're constantly being told there's this and you've got to be future focused, so there's that whole sort of headspace. But then the bit that comes in, is, and the analogy I always like is before, and I've posted on this, before 2009, no one was talking about tablets as the revolutionary thing that would affect and make education better and brighter. And then what happened in 2009? Apple released a tablet. And by 2010, we were all supposed to be buying the future. And I go, well, no, if we were all future-focused, in 2008, we would have been discussing why the tablet will be useful.
I can't wait for these tablets. This is what we need.
And so, it's that, dog wagging tail,
Bit reactive, maybe.
Well, reactive, but then sort of, we quickly positively spin it into, well, we're future focused, so therefore we've got this. And yet you look in behind. I mean, Google Apps is another good example. Ultimately, it is an Office suite, But what it allows for, in terms of shared or instant or anywhere, is just a shift in how we do what we do. And yet if you come into it, well, it's just an Office suite. Well, then why would I do it? I've got Office. I've learned Microsoft Office product, and I've put up with the fact that they've changed the interface 4 times in the last 3 iterations. And it was even that's a perfect example. It was a real challenge when we went and we were on 07 to go to 10. It was like literally, I'm not running PD sessions on how to understand a ribbon. What have you done? And that was scaled across lots of organisations, I'm sure, but in education in particular. There's always a new thing coming. And so you're asking people who already have, heavy workloads in lots of different ways. I mean, people have asked
their job is not to keep up with IT.
No.
That's IT's job. Their job is not that. And I presume, and your role here is not to keep them up with IT, to help them through that change.
No, not even that. I mean, and for our, in terms of that infrastructure that allows that is basically it's twofold. It's building that infrastructure that allows you to access those tools and use those tools. The choices of which tools you use are still yours as schools, as individual teachers, and as entities. So the ministry is highly unlikely to say you should use this, this, and this. They will, if you go to their different pages, TKO, they will say here's a range of tools you could use from, Adobe at one end through to Picasa at the other as the big chunky one through to the free ones, and on that scale, how you manage and make them. And I guess I really one of that you go to those conversations about being really critical about how all this stuff is coming in and the impacts of how it gets rolled in. And it's at a 2-layer thing. And I like I don't know if you know Rowan Simpson.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's one of the things, a couple of his blog posts, it's no's are actually about saying yes. And I don't think in education we're critically open to saying no because we don't want to be behind. We don't want to, and yet I think in my practice just for example on Twitter late last year I was like, this is just stupid. What am I doing with this fire hose? I just need to cut it down. So I unfollowed like about 800 people over the course of the weekend. Some of them who told me later they were like horrified that I'd unfollowed them. I was like, well, but it's my feed. I kind of need to pay attention to what's happening to me. It doesn't mean I'm not your friend. And I don't think in education we do that as individual practitioners sometimes. To know that actually you can use this notebook for things.
It's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to be, and I've said it to how do I get into it? I said, well, the first thing you do is, don't look at those lists of 101 tools to help you in your teaching, because you just flood yourselves with nonsense. Or, it's about reducing and saying no to stuff. And then I think as organisations being aware of how, if you want to bring something new in, and Banker's a good example. I work with Kendall and those guys on that startup weekend, and I'm happy to share it with people. But I said part of the shift, and I think what they've done quite well with their design in terms of the funding model, is to say, actually, it's okay if it's just one teacher who's using it as part of their class program, and that's an important thing to do because it allows those teachers, and that's one of the beauties of the New Zealand system. If a teacher's interested in financial literacy and really wants to make it part of their classroom practice or their team practice, then a tool like Banker, which they can spend the time in using, fits really neatly in it. It's not like we all have to sign up to be a part of this. And I think that's the future of, it's that criticalness of what's not using it. But also being okay with, we used Banker last year, but because we've got an arts program and a really big focus on, visual medium, Banker's just going to be put to the side for this year, and then we roll on. And I think that flexibility is important to, particularly in the New Zealand model of education, where, like you say, every school can manage and negotiate it. The criticalness of teachers and organisations to say, no, we don't need that. No, we don't need that. But actually, we could use this, this, and this. And again, it's a reflection of how I think individuals need to get better at not just ed tech but tech. If you spend your whole life watching Twit, then you're going, I need all this stuff. No, you don't. Maybe you need 4 tools to help your day get better.
And the network that you're putting in, this is my final question. Really.
Yep.
The network that you guys are putting in, do you see that as being, what's the word I'm looking for? Conduit's a horrible word. We've got
The connector.
ministry, schools. You're sort of in the middle, really, because you're across the schools.
Yeah, and every school be connected.
Thing.
Yep.
Is there a subtle, sly way that you guys see yourself as being the nails that join them together? I can't think of them in that correct analogy.
Yeah, I think in my head, in terms of joining it, the big push or the big win out of all this will be, it gives teachers and school leaders space to do what they need to do in one layer. It's a layer that underpins. Going back to at its base level, it's a utility. It's like water. It's like electricity that allows you to do a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And Wilson Minor's talks from Webstock, I don't know if you saw that one a couple of years ago, he talks about how we choose our tools, the Marshall McLuhan thing, we choose our tools and our tools shape us. You might say, electricity doesn't shape us, but it allows us to work into the night. It allows us to have heating.
Who does that?
And so as a utility underneath it, you might say it's pretty neutral. But we know it's not neutral because it allows us to do a whole bunch of things. I'd like to think that N4L is that utility that supports at a base level every school in the country. On top of that, I'd like to think that it can actually really have an influence on how education is delivered and how it's shaped and how it's again, it's coming sort of that word, conduit, it's an ugly one, but how it becomes part of how we as a society, and I think that's really important because it's not just ministry, it's not just the government of the day, and I think of what the net whois are. If you're saying, well, this thing we call the internet is about society and conversation, then what does that mean? And that has to be regular and ongoing. If we're saying Network for Learning is a managed network that connects every school, well, what are the opportunities that allows for schools, for education? And I think the really important thing is that, and it's a tough one, it's kind of like, as a parent, you've got to let your kid go off and, fall off that ford occasionally. We have to be, as a society who's, and this is a taxpayer initiative, taxpayer-funded initiative, how does this network allow, on top of that, how are we trusting those schools or supporting those schools to build real, ongoing, critical relationships and critical connections with tools, with all of this stuff on top of that, and then how are we, and we've got to be okay with them, their settings weren't right. Yep, the kids saw some porn. Okay, that's all right. The things aren't always going to work magically, and I think we've also got to be okay with it not being, the Apple 12-month cycle of OS release. This is, for me, if I look at Network for Learning, this is a minimum 10-year shift in terms of understanding how education is delivered and created. Minimum. Where are we? 2015. And already, in my role, you're seeing schools as a little kura well up in Northland who were connected. And I was looking at the map going, there's no one else near you. And we're like, yep. But she said, we've got some tablets, we've got some devices, but there's no one here who can do any tech support. And I said, we did some, and there was a school 300 kilometres away on the network with the tech there. And he said, yep, I'll help. And how were they able to connect with the network?
That's very cool.
What they did was up to them. But the network allowed that.
Enabled it though. Enabled them.
Perfect.
And that for me is the thing.
The network enabled them to do that. However, the conversation connected them.
And so my role is to sort of look for those and help those. My official role is school training lead, so it's about working with schools to understand what a managed network allows. And again, that's more complex and that's more, I think, needs to be more, at a surface level, iPads and apps. And the iTunes store is where most school leaders' heads are in, because that's the stuff that's thrust at them. Managed network at this point, I think, it's just free internet. And so we have to build, as a network, products and services that can come over that network to actually say, well, because of this, it's like Google Apps. Because of this, then this can happen. And that's an interesting one in terms of how you present that, because there's a number of different audiences you're presenting to, and again, that continuum of people and where they are and understanding. But again, it's conversation.
Cool.
That's where I'm going.
Well, thanks for your conversation.
That's right.
Yeah.
Before we go, of course, people are going to want to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
How do they have the conversation with you? You and, as I've now learned, Infrel. So, where would they find you on Tinternets?
On the internet. So the main webpage is www.n4l.co.nz. My email's easiest, actually just tim.kong, which occasionally people joke at me sounds like the German man, but it's not. tim.kong at n4l.co.nz, and then on Twitter I'm at TimoSlimo, TIMOSLIMO.
But don't expect to follow.
No.
Follow him, but you can get followed back. Unless you're awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks
Well, that's
so
great.
much, Tim. I've learned so much from your conversations. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
Well, that was quite a cool interview. I mean, I learned quite a lot because we interview a lot of people who are not in the education side of things, but in the regular tech sector.
Yeah.
Hey, you need this platform, that platform, whatever. It was quite interesting to see how he thinks about things from the external point of view, how he has to deal with a lot of questions coming from a lot of places, especially in the education sector. From my personal experience, a lot of the education sector don't know what they don't know, and it's quite hard to get things going. And it's quite good that there's a place like this that they can all refer to and get help from,
So they've got a big job ahead, but people having people like Tim in that area, helping the education sector in schools particularly, and teachers, as he said, it's all about the people, helping them from I've been there, I understand, hold my hand, I'll take you there, is a fantastic thing and gives us great hope for technology in the education sector. So well done, Tim, and thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Right, next week, what's coming up next week? Amber Craig. We talked to Amber Craig about her many endeavours, including the digital architect and what it actually does, or a digital architect does, and being on the Council of Internet New Zealand.
Now, that's only 2 out of, 6 or 7
She's
things?
about 400 projects on the go at any given time.
Yes. There's a moment where, I don't know if Raj has left it in, where we were stunned into silence when she said, oh, by the way, I also do this.
Yeah.
She is a whirlwind of energy.
Activity.
Getting things done is certainly in Amber's lexicon. So a fantastic interview coming up next week with Amber.
Right, so, end of the show. You know what to do. Find us on all the social networks for the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, or chat to us via our Twitter handles. Mine's NZRaj.
And mine is at Miramar Mike.
And you can email us on accessgranted@me.co.nz. You know what, most people don't, It's almost like the fax machine. It's sort of going out of fashion already. And for all the other hashtag goodness, such as the updates, news, prizes, and much, much more, go to the #me.co.nz website. And thanks for your time, and see you next Tuesday for all the Kiwi tech people sharing their own stories.
Ka kite
Anō.
#me.co.nz